Our lesson this coming Sunday, March the 30th, is entitled Work Your Plan, and it's going to be looking now at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 13, following up on the scripture that we had last week where we looked at chapter 9, verses 1 through 5. Now, there's long been an axiom that works in with the title of your lesson, Work Your Plan. The old axiom is plan your work and then work your plan. So planning the work, we think through it, but then we carry out and we do what we plan. Planning involves intellectual intelligence, but working means putting feet to our plans and doing something about it. It's one thing to kind of have ideas. It's another thing to put those ideas to work and do something about the ideas. I had some college young people that had some ideas about studying, but they didn't get around to studying. So you can't just think about studying, you've got to actually study it. Not just think about learning, you've got to learn. And so in this lesson now, we want to look at working your plan, doing, in other words, something about it. So Paul now is going to remind them that God has been generous in giving to us, so therefore we ought to give to glorify God, and we ought to give to glorify Christ, and keep in mind that Christ set the example by giving his all for us. So this is what Paul then wants them to do. Your curriculum writer will mention now that studies have indicated that that the average church member gives maybe at the most 3%. But I have some facts that your lesson doesn't include that I've done some research on that says about half of the membership of all Christian churches in America give nothing. About half give nothing during the course of a year. About 25% give some, but the real giving is done by just a small percent. And if you figure it out, in other words, that the main giving is done by a small percent. So many Christians do not in the course of the year give anything financially at all to the local church where they're members, so far as the church is known. So Sunday school teacher, we ought to urge our members, so let's look at our own personal giving patterns, because if we're not careful, without intending to do so, we get so busy spending our money on everything else. I found out a long time ago, as a new Christian, coming out of a non-Christian home, that I couldn't spend my money on everything else and then give God some that was left over. I had to give some to the Lord first. So when I did my paper route and got paid, or I did something, I worked at a job in a store, I gave my offering first, then lived on what was left over in that way. So working at our plan, but have a plan and then work on it. And so that's what the lesson is about. The first part of the lesson focuses on chapter 9, verses 6 through 7. And Paul is reminding now the Christians at Corinth now of the biblical principle that whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. And of course, this is an agricultural experience. Paul was not a farmer, but Paul was an intelligent, brilliant man, and he knew farming. In fact, he knew athletics. He draws metaphors. But Jesus also taught this. And of course, anyone knows if you go out and the farmer in antiquity scattered the seed by hand. If you just took a small handful and scattered it over a large acre, you're going to have a sparse crop. But if you were willing to put more seed in there, you'd get more of a harvest. So if you sow sparingly, you reap sparingly. And Paul is using this then as a biblical principle. So that is give. If you will give abundantly, Paul is implying then you will be blessed in return in keeping with what you've given, something like that. And so in verse